All right, I'm gonna talk to you guys a little bit about bleach and tones and platinum cards today. So this is gonna be for someone who wants to be completely blonde with no dimension in between, all the way from their scalp through their ends. I'm gonna show you a couple different scenarios. Our first one down here, obviously, is gonna be someone with completely virgin hair. And we'll go up. This person has been lifted before, but they've got some new growth, so we're gonna wanna touch that up first before we deal with this. And then over here on this side, we're gonna talk about a root touch up and then maybe how we can refresh these ends at the very end. So someone that has completely virgin hair, or if this is someone that has really dark color, you'd wanna do this technique too. You could come in and take your sections and your lightener and apply all the way down and just let it process open air. It's gonna dry out a little bit faster. You're not gonna get as much lift out of it, which we wanna get as much as possible. So we're gonna do a platinum card on her today. And a platinum card is basically going to be highlights. You're just not leaving any hair in between. So I'm gonna come all the way down to the bottom here. This mannequin's got a few highlights underneath here, but we're just gonna ignore them and pretend like she's never been lifted before. And you wanna take these sections as small as you would take a weave that you would put in a foil. It's just gonna be back-to-back slices all the way up her head. There we go. Her hairline's a little uneven, so this first section might be wonky. On a real person, you're not going to see a piece quite this narrow at the nape, probably. So I'm gonna take my foil. I'm gonna bring it up like I would my foil. And when you're lifting hair, you always wanna start with whatever's going to process the slowest. So when we put bleach on her scalp, that heat is gonna make it process super, super fast. So on somebody like her, where we're lifting pretty much all of her hair, we're gonna start and we're just gonna leave out that hair at the scalp there. Everything else is getting lightened. We're gonna come through and do her roots last because they're going to process a lot faster. So I've got my foil. I'm gonna start a little bit lower than where I wanna be just to make sure I don't get too high. With it being in a foil, this lightener is gonna expand up too. You always wanna think about that. And I'm just gonna feather up and leave out about 1/8 of an inch away from her scalp. And I'm gonna fold my foil. Remember, we're not completely foiling these, or folding these, I'm sorry. You just wanna kinda pinch the ends enough so that you can get these pieces folded in. You don't want to fold the hair here. That's going to cause a crease. It's going to move your product around and you could possibly end up with a line of demarcation in her hair, which we don't want. We want this to be as even as possible. So I've got my first foil. I'm going to take her hair down. And bring my next section. She wants to be completely blonde, so we're not leaving any hair out. All of this is going in our next foil here. And we're gonna do the exact same thing. So since there is no dimension in this at all, you wanna make sure you have a really thorough conversation with your client to make sure that this is something that they're okay with. Because they're gonna have to come in a lot sooner than they would if they had balayage, ombre, traditional highlights. That demarcation line is gonna come in really, really fast. So you wanna make sure that they're prepared for that and that they're aware of the maintenance that's going to be required for this kind of color. I'm going to show you one more. Next section. You want to keep these really thin so you're not working too hard to saturate. You want to make sure it's saturated as evenly as possible so you don't miss any spots. You don't want any patchy pieces because it's going to be really obvious in a color like this. And you want to make sure it's nice and saturated, but not oversaturated. So since this lightener is in a foil and they're so packed together, there's going to be quite a bit of heat created, and these lighteners going to expand in here. You don't want these to get too puffy. It's going to get really messy, and your foils could slip. All right, I'm gonna speed the rest of these up and I'll come back when I get to our next section. Okay, so I finished this section, and one thing I forgot to mention was my developer. If you're doing this to somebody's whole head, it's gonna take you a while. So you wanna start with the lowest volume possible. I use 10 volume. I probably could have used something lower or even like diluted my 10 volume a little bit more because this is gonna take me a minute talking through. If you're a slow foiler, you could even mix like a 6 volume in with your lightener just to make sure those first few foils are processing a little bit slower. So now I've come up to where she's a little bit more blonde here. She's lifted her hair before, but she waited a couple months to come back in, or she lifted it at home and now she's wanting a little bit of help fixing it. And we are going to use the same technique we're just going to start weaving out some pieces, and we're gonna leave out her ends that have already been lifted previously. So I'm still gonna come through and take a really small section. So you can see here, she maybe had some highlights before. She's got some new growth that's all the way up here. She has some pieces that are completely virgin. This new growth up here is pretty high up. That's gonna process pretty evenly when we get her roots. So I'm really just worried about these ends down here that are still her natural color. So I'm gonna come through and pick those up, and we're gonna lift those the same way that we were lifting previously. This is where I say it's gonna take you a minute, because sometimes it's hard to find all those pieces. There we go. That's a little bit better. I'm gonna come through and refresh her ends all over at the end anyway, so I'm not super worried about these few blonde pieces that are left behind. I'm just gonna keep doing what I was doing before. Gonna apply the same way, a little bit lower than I want to be, all the way through her ends. And then I'm gonna feather up to just below where we're gonna lighten her roots later. Take another small section. So this one here really doesn't have much at all that needs to be lifted. Just right about here, there's a little patch. So I'm gonna leave the rest of this for now, and I'm just gonna pick up this piece. We're gonna put that in a foil. So that we can see it a little bit better. I'm really just worried about this, and I'm gonna feather over this band just a little bit. This is a really small section. I want a little bit more control, so I'm gonna come in with a smaller brush this time. And I'm not gonna have much product on it. I'm just going to apply right there on that darkest point first. Feather it down a little bit over that darker band there of orange. All of it's pretty orange, but it's just a little bit darker there. And I'm gonna feather up to just under where we'll be lifting her roots later. I'm gonna push this hair out of the way so it doesn't get folded up on top of the lightener there. And fold our foil as we normally would. So this section here, stick it under a foil just so we can see what's going on a little bit better. So we can see here, there's a little bit of banding going on, and this piece right here we definitely want to get. That even seems maybe a little bit too thick there on the edge. I'm gonna take a little bit off. Okay. Come back in here. And I'm just going to apply to those bands. All right, so I've got those darker bands up top, saturated. I'm gonna push them out of my way a little bit here. And get this streak here. Sometimes they might just have a band of new growth. You won't have to pull anything through. In that case, you can just get that band of new growth that's gonna process slower, like I did right here. Push it out of your way and fold up your foil. do one more, and then I'll speed this up again. So this one, her ends are pretty light. They're matching this other side here. So I'm just gonna get this band right here. Oops. I'm gonna kind of get this hair out of my way. And fold it up. All right, I'm gonna finish this section and I will come back on the other side and we'll talk about retouching the roots. Okay, so I finished her foils over here. If I were doing a full head application of this, I would want to be checking these as I'm working to make sure that they're not done processing. If they are, you can go ahead and pull them and rinse them and then just go back and keep foiling. In that case, you'd want to blow dry her and then get her roots. You don't want to put it on when it's wet. Since these just finished, I'm going to let them process and go ahead and do her root touch up on this side, and then we'll do these last. So on a real person, I would want to use the cream lightener. It's going to be a little bit more gentle on their scalp, and it's still going to give you enough lift because you have that heat there. This is the mannequin, so she doesn't have any heat. I'm going to go ahead and keep using Ultimate Lightener from Kevin Murphy. And I've switched to 20 volume now. The lightener that you use on the scalp is really going to depend on their starting level and how light you're trying to go. I'm pretty much never going to start with 30 volume on a scalp though. 20 volume is going to give you enough lift in the back, and you don't want it to over process. And you never want to put 40 volume on their scalp either. So I'm going to keep using my smaller brush so I have a little bit more detail, a little bit more control. And I've subsectioned this into smaller pieces so it's less hair for me to work with. I don't want to be too messy and get my 20 volume on this hair down here that we've already processed. We're going to go back in later with like a bleach wash, bump it up a little bit, but we don't want any bright white spots in her ends. So I'm gonna kind of outline my subsection here, and I'm just tapping this product on. I'm not really pressing. You don't want to scratch with your brush. It's going to stimulate blood flow to the scalp, and it's going to make that lightener feel really, really itchy. You want them to be as comfortable as possible, and for this to be able to do this process as long as you need it to. So once I've got the sides, I'm gonna lift this section up. I'm gonna come underneath and I'm gonna tap. I'm not tapping it all the way on her scalp, just kind of right up to it. That lightener will expand and reach all the way. And I'm tapping it just until I reach that line of demarcation. From this point, we're combing through active lightener. You're not going to want to use a highlighting comb anymore. I'm going to use a plastic tail comb. So we don't want metal touching lightener. I'm going to use about the same size sectioning for this as I did for the platinum card. That's what's going to make sure it's nice and saturated without you having to push that product in and either irritating their scalp or going over that demarcation line and overlapping. So I'm getting just not a ton of lightener on my brush. You don't want to overdo it. And I am just tapping up to that line of demarcation. Now I'm going to take another piece. Same thing. Nice and small. You want really, really thin sections when you're blonding someone globally. It's going to give you the most even saturation and the most even lift. We're just gonna keep going all the way up her head. I always like to start in the back. One, their hair is typically darker underneath here. Also, those baby hairs in the front are gonna lift a lot faster. You wanna put the lightener on those last. I'm just gonna continue doing these paper thin sections all the way up, and then I will come back through and I'll get her roots on this side. If I were doing a full head bleach retouch, I would want to, when I hit about the end of this section here, come over and do the same amount of hair on this other side. You want it to process evenly. That way, if this is done before the front is, you can go ahead and lean her back in the bowl and rinse what you need to, and this can continue to process until it's ready. So I'm gonna speed the rest of this up for you guys, and I will come back at the end and kind of recap what I did. Okay, so I finished applying the lightener all over to her roots. On this section here with the foils, I just opened them up so they were a little easier to move and slipped them down so that I could hit either side and apply the same way I did previously. From here, we could just let her process if we weren't worried about these ends. We were just trying to match them up to this. For her, we're gonna try to kick her up a little bit lighter, so I'm gonna go ahead and flip these out of my way again and start pulling them and saturate these ends with just some 10 volume diluted with water, and that'll be it for her color. Okay, so here she is all rinsed and dried. You can obviously see the side where we just had kind of like a 6-week touch-up lifted a lot more cleanly and evenly than the previously lightened and kind of splotchy side. This would have been a color correction. Anytime you're doing a platinum card, it's going to be a color correction. You can see that the pink also didn't lift out very well, but that's okay because we're going to go over color corrections next week. That's all I have for you guys, and I hope you guys are staying warm this week. Bye.